Welcome to Accented. Tonight, we have the honor of speaking with Anida Yoeu Ali and LinDa Saphan. Shout out to our DJ for Accented, DJ Puzzle. How you doing tonight, Puzzle?
I'm well, Philip. How about yourself?
Doing good, feeling good. Better
Yeah,
with you here.
say it again.
Better with you here.
Oh man, I love it. Love you, man. Great.
Yeah, love you back. Thank you for setting the vibe for our 46th Accented Dialogues in Diaspora show. This episode is titled The Space Between Hybridity in the Diaspora. My name is Philip Nguyen, and I'm one of your co-hosts slash MC slash hype man for Accented Dialogues in Diaspora that's presented by the Diasporic Vietnamese Artists Network, or DVAN. Um, Thank you all for joining us here on the Zoom. If you didn't know, DVAN's mission is to foster diasporic Vietnamese and Southeast Asian literary voices. We empower artists in the diaspora and champion our complex and diverse stories. We are refugees, immigrants, survivors, and descendants, and know that our stories must be heard. So if you like what you're hearing, please pay us a visit to dvan.org. Check out our website, the different programs that we've got going on to support Vietnamese and Southeast Asian literary voices, writers, artists, poets. And you can also donate to us at dvan.org/donate, or you can click the support link at the bottom of this episode's description. Um, if you also didn't know, this podcast, Accented, is available on Spotify, Apple Music, and wherever you get your podcasts. I'd like to take this moment now to also thank our sponsor, AppLovin. Their leading marketing platform and provides developers a powerful set of solutions to grow their mobile apps. AppLovin's technology platform enables developers to market, monetize, analyze, and publish their apps. The company's first-party content includes over 200 popular, engaging apps, and its technology brings that content to millions of users around the world. AppLovin is headquartered in Palo Alto, California, with several offices globally. You can learn more at applovin.com. It's around dinner time and it's the end of April for this episode, which is very, very timely. Who better to talk speak with us on Accented than my co-host, Mr. Viet Thanh Nguyen, whose novel The Sympathizer won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. His most recent books are Simone, a children's book illustrated by Minnie Fan, and A Man of Two Faces, a memoir, a history, a memorial. He is also the editor of the Displaced Refugee Writers on Refugee Lives and one of the co-founders of DVAN. Welcome back to Accented, Viet.
Hey, Philip, so great to be back here with you and with DJ Puzzle. Love you both. I'm glad we're starting off with this note of love
Mm,
and affection. It's really great to be here. Apparently, on the 100th day of the current administration, and one day before the 50th anniversary of the end of the American War in Vietnam. And we have guests who are from another part of Southeast Asia with us today. So we'll get into all of these kinds of issues around art and politics and commemoration and really interesting stuff. First, with our guest, Anida Yoeu Ali, who is an interdisciplinary artist whose works span performance, installation, new media, public encounters, and political agitation. Her installation and performance works investigate the artistic, spiritual, and political collisions of a hybrid transnational identity, and she's performed and exhibited internationally. She is the recipient of grants from the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and the National Endowment of the Arts, and is currently the senior artist in residence at the University of Washington at Bothell. Hi, Anita. Glad to have you with us.
Hi, thank you. And I love that you said that my school's name as Bothell. It sounds very exotic. It's actually Bothell, but I love Bothell.
You know what? I usually check pronunciations before the show, as you know, but until I saw that, I didn't remember how to pronounce the name. I'm never going to say it again, so it doesn't really matter. Thank you for
Thank you.
correcting me.
a
Our
subtle plug to
next,
the school to invite Viet back to
yeah,
the campus.
now they're never going to invite me after I said that. But
Oh, they
our,
will.
our next guest is LinDa Saphan. She is an urban anthropologist and a prominent voice in Cambodian cultural studies. She's published extensively on Cambodia's early popular music and is the author of two books, Faded Reels, The Art of 460 to 1975, and Remnant of the Past, a filmography of Cambodian early cinema. She's the assistant dean of the School of Social Sciences, and I'm going to mess this up too, at the University of Mount Saint Vincent, or is it Mount Saint Vincent? Because is it in France or is it in or where is it?
No, this is in the Bronx. It's in Mount St.
Oh,
Vincent.
okay, Mount
Thank
Saint
you. You
Vincent in
nailed
that
it.
case. Got it. Okay.
Thank you for having me, and thank you, Anida, for always including me. This is gonna be an exciting evening.
Yeah, I think so. And that you don't even have to be drinking, but Philip and I will habitually do this throughout the night. Um, as I mentioned, it is almost the 50th anniversary of the end of the American War in Vietnam, which was April 30th, 1975. I've been all over the place doing all kinds of interviews and so on, talking about this, because of course now with the 50th anniversary, there's lots of interest about the past and how it affects the present. But for Cambodia, especially the diaspora, the day that marks the end of the war is April 17th. So you've had a couple of weeks almost to think about this 50th anniversary. I'm curious what your feelings are as we've reached this milestone in Cambodian history, the history of the Cambodian diaspora, and something that has been, as far as I can tell, almost completely overlooked in the United States. So much attention about the end of the quote unquote Vietnam War, for better and for worse. And as someone who is called on often to be the so-called professional Vietnamese, I feel considerable angst about dwelling on this history from an American perspective, which I constantly try to unsettle. But it disturbs me that there's not even that recognition in the United States of this history. Let's start with you.
Well,
What do you think?
I'm gonna start with that. The 17th of April in Cambodia, the president of China was in official visit with cheers and crowd waving. Um, um, it is symbolically, it's really powerful to forget that the Chinese did back up the Khmer Rouge, and this rewriting of history. It is really disturbing, right? So it's not just among the diaspora, the country itself, by having, I don't know who make the decision, how it happened, but on this very, very important day, that's what happened in Cambodia.
It's these commemorations are commemorations run by states. They're very important symbolically and politically. So, for example, in Vietnam, the anniversary is tomorrow, or maybe it's happening right now. But it's a big celebration, parades and all that kind of stuff. The United States, as of I think yesterday, was extremely reluctant to allow its own diplomats to participate in the 50th anniversary celebrations in Vietnam. So I think they allow like a junior level diplomat to participate, but not the American ambassador. So it sends signals about what the national priorities are. And of course, it's very undiplomatic to not have your ambassador show up for this event. So for Cambodians, and LinDa, I'll go back to you on this, yes, it's a very complicated history. Did American diplomats participate in these commemorations?
I wasn't there locally, so I am not able to talk more, but I could say that all the events in the diaspora that I have seen and I participated, it seems to be a NGO, non-for-profit organizations that are struggling to get funding necessarily, especially in America here. And it's been focused more on the diaspora, which is something new. Whereas in France, for its colonial past, this is a whole month events with 40 film in Paris. And so it's really interesting to see each country, the past relationship and how much budget it means that the community was able to organize. It's also reflecting that, right? So New York, because New York has small community, it's not as big and grandiose, for example, than Lowell, that is happening. And it's still ongoing now, the events they're organizing.
For the Vietnamese American community, of course, there's still that sense that this is Black April, a term I really object to, but an event saturated in melancholy and loss, the loss of the nation and so on. It was different. There was a conflict, and one side won and one side lost, and the situation is rather, I think, different in Cambodia. But Anida, what is your sense of how do you feel about this marker in time?
It is definitely very complex for me. It brings up a lot of things related to, the the moment that changed our family's history and trajectory forever. And in this particular moment, being the 50th year, I think about the secret bombings, and I think about the ways in which I'm relating to that horrific, you know, uh, warmongering that seems to be so prevalent. And right now, as a Muslim who survived the Khmer Rouge atrocities, to which, the Khmer Rouge killed 50% of Cham Muslims, which is an outrageous number, and targeted the ethnic minorities there. And then I'm thinking about this moment, right? I can't help but feel such sorrow and such a I've been in a deep depression with issues related to Palestine and the ways in which we keep using this phrase. And because my husband is also Japanese and our children are now both Cambodian and Japanese, we have this history of the Americans bombing us to connect us, but also this remembrance, right? The act of trying to keep these memories alive. And then we say on a collective level, never again. And that is such a lie. And that's the one phrase I just want us to never say, because it keeps going on, and there has to be something to disrupt it. And maybe we're in that moment where there are cracks in the empire and this will happen. So those are the things I'm thinking about.
I mean, I'm glad you brought up Palestine. Of course, I mean, in my own, when I've been called upon to ask to talk about the significance of the 50th anniversary, I try to talk not just about the impact on the Vietnamese or what it meant during the wartime period, but to connect the events of the war in Vietnam to our present. The United States went on to fight in Iraq and Afghanistan, terrible, misguided invasions that terribly damaged these countries. And now, of course, with Palestine, it seems that the United States has learned all the wrong lessons in terms of who to support and the consequences of American actions and the deaths of mostly non-white people. There's a certain degree of culpability for the United States that many Americans would like to disavow or not even acknowledge, certainly at the governmental level. LinDa, I'm kind of curious from your perspective as someone who has spent a lot of time in France and working there, what is the French attitude towards its own involvement in Cambodia and its own role in colonization, but also how it shaped the Khmer Rouge?
So it's interesting. I just came back from Paris with this big symposium that is happening, and there were some debate among the French scholars. So like the French there were many French scholars that kind of support the Khmer Rouge, like Liberation, the magazine Liberation, keep on diminishing, saying these, like when there's a number of casualty or death coming in, it's like, these are not reliable numbers. They were really in denial until actually the movie Killing Field came out. They started to say, maybe we revisit this. But many of them kind of, very socialist, kind of want to believe in that dream that the Khmer Rouge kind of saying, oh, the communal experience and agrarian, whatever. It took a while for the French, Le Monde never acknowledged that they were, not recognizing and their contribution to not acknowledging what happened to Cambodia. I just want to go back when Anida said that the Khmer Rouge target the Cham and the minorities. They didn't only just target physically by killing them, but they also forbid any cultural practice. In 4 years, that has a lot of damage when you don't remember your rituals, you don't remember how things and language is spoken, you are erasing the remainder 50% that remaining. It's also a struggle, right? So it's not just physical eliminations, it's cultural eliminations within the 3 years, 8 months, and 20 days that they were in power.
Yeah, maybe I wanted to, I mean, taking that note and passing it over to you, Anita, like amidst this physical elimination and cultural elimination that LinDa is talking about, like how have you been able to understand or find your own sense of identity, ethnic identity or national identity or association with an identity or a community that if there is one, if you could share a little bit about how you grew up and how you came into understanding your identity and the way that it's expressed through your art.
Yeah, I have a pretty complex relationship with Cambodia and Khmer identity because I grew up Muslim. That was extremely important for my family to carry the religion with them. And I didn't understand it as a child, but now, when I got older and put the pieces together historically, and then when I finally went back to Cambodia for the very first time, I was 30 years old. So to return as an adult, as someone who already read up on these things and had all these expectations and anticipation and worries. Um, all this to say that my family, it was very important for them to preserve our religious identity as our cultural identity. And so something that I talk about a lot is the ways in which we learned Arabic. We learned Arabic before Khmer. It was more important for my parents to make sure we could read and write Arabic so that we can read scripture, the Quran. Um, but they never taught us how to read and write Khmer. So I thought that was interesting thinking about it. I mean, I knew how to speak it because that's how they would converse with us, but they never took the time as they did with the Arabic to prioritize that, to teach that. And so when I was growing up in the Chicagoland area in the western suburbs, I grew up very much amongst a diverse Muslim population. And that's when I learned about Pakistanis, Syrians, Jordanians, Egyptians. I mean, this is the 1980s we're talking about. And here I am at a makeshift mosque in a prayer line in community with all these diverse, beautiful brown bodies. And we were always the only Southeast Asian Muslim and always the only Cambodian Muslim. It was something that stuck out. It was something that exoticized us further, but we also, made a really intense community connection with our mosque family, with our sort of chosen family as a community. We were always there. And then on top of it, we were the ones who made the cool egg rolls. So for
Mm.
every like mosque buffet fundraiser event, um, what do you call it, potlucks, it was always like you got to ask the Yu family, because they're going to come out with the egg rolls, and of course they're halal, so that was like a double bonus. They weren't pork, they were like halal ground beef and all that. So um I had a really profound time growing up within that context where we didn't always show up for Khmer New Year, but we always went for Eid, for both Eid ceremonies, congregational prayer, Sunday school, summer school. And I almost had like various different identities. I learned to play different personas for different communities, for different distinct communities. So much so that I had multiple names to change those identities because I had an Arabic name, I had a Khmer name, and then I had, my American sort of things that would like poke out. And there were different dress codes for each of those communities as well. So that was something that was always inside me, was this idea of changing personas, changing identities, reinventing myself for distinct communities. And I think that is ultimately what has informed how I work as a performance artist.
Yeah, and your work too. I know like the Buddhist bug is it's the color is very. I come from a Vietnamese Buddhist family, so the orange robe is very distinct. But at the face of you're the face of the Buddhist bug is you who is in the who's in hijab, right? I think we see the way in which this like hybrid, this the sort of blending of like culture and religion comes into play in your work. I want to pass it to you and open it up. If you could share a little bit more about that right there.
Yeah, that whole Buddhist Bug series was a response to me returning at the age of 30 to Cambodia
Mm,
and realizing for the first time in my life what a real small ethnic minority my identity was as a Muslim. So
mm,
when I landed in Southeast Asia, I was surrounded by this the saffron robes, which blew me away. The intensity of the color, the different shades of orange in Vietnam, in Thailand, in Cambodia, in Burma, like that, like sort of really vividly stuck with me. But the other part of that is, as I'm surrounded by this overwhelming orange, wow, I get it. I now understand what was important for my parents to pass down to me was they were saving this religious identity that has been passed on for generations in our family for us, for their next generation. So creating the Buddhist Bug is that representation. When you first look at it, it is overwhelmingly orange. It is this diasporic, transnational creature being, but you got to go and look closer to see all the hints that I'm giving you that maybe there's something more beyond this namesake that you need to look deeper. And that's why she ultimately wears a hijab and is, exemplifying a kind of modesty kind of dress where she's only showing her face and her feet in this iteration. And the other sort of problem I was trying to solve for myself as a diasporic artist was, how do I create something that can bring two disparate points or points of dislocation closer together? That was my sort of formalistic idea behind this work that I was sketching out. And none of it came together until I gave birth to my first child in 2008. And we were gifted, like 6 months into it, we were gifted this play tunnel, this collapsible play tunnel. For those of you with children or nieces and nephews, it's this elongated collapsible tunnel that you can compress and fold up and tuck away in your small apartment, but then you can like pull it out. It kind of looks like a laundry chute, an IKEA laundry chute. You expand it and the kids have a blast. And I kept looking at this thing and I was like, this is it. This is the form, something that can pack up and be portable, similar to the ideas of what refugees have to do, which is carry the things on their back, right? Arrive at a location with everything that they could carry. And then when you expand it, it just it can be expansive. It can take up space. And so all those ideas that had been germinating for years, the Buddhist Bug was not something I just came up with. It has been years in the making, but it didn't take shape until I landed with my 2 feet and my family in 2011, residing in Cambodia and deciding to stay put in Cambodia and take residency, that the magic happened for me, which was the sheer inspiration from being amongst my people and having my 2 feet on that land and being so inspired by what I was seeing, and created this creature that is, of course, exemplifying difference, right? This idea that for her, as the Buddhist Bug, she feels perfectly at home. She feels like, hey, I'm hanging out in the alley, I'm on a cyclo, but then, wait a minute, what? Why is everybody else looking at me all funny? Is there something wrong with me? So that's the idea of kind of otherness in the work, but
I love the way the response brings up the fact that there's something called Cambodia, but within it, there's this incredible diversity that spills out of any kind of Cambodian category and that intersects with other nations and ethnicities and religions. It's a perfect analogy for being an artist in a lot of ways. It's a category that's helpful but also insufficient. And I know, LinDa, you also feel, I think, some of these ambivalences about categorization as well, and you have your own unique background. So tell us a little bit about that, about how you were raised, and what the category of Cambodian means or doesn't mean for you.
So I don't have the skill of code switching that Anida have. I grew up under the I was born before the Khmer Rouge. My whole family went through the Khmer Rouge. And this is important. And then I grew up, my mother always said that we are Cambodian Khmer, right? So this is something. So what's the difference, right? Cambodian is a nationality. Anyone lives within that country are Cambodian, but Khmer referred to an ethnicity. So I grew up thinking I am Khmer until this is the most embarrassing moment when I went to Paris. I took Cambodian Khmer lesson language, and the teacher asked how to say grandfather in Khmer, and I'm so proud, raised my hand, was like showing off. I was already like 22 saying gong, right? And they all look at me and say like, LinDa, this is a Chinese term. I was like, no, I'm Khmer, and this is how we say. And that moment I discovered I was not Khmer per se. And then I started to have that conversation with my family, and I realized my aunt just like, what's my aunt who was in Paris, just like, what's wrong with you? Of course we're not Khmer. But to my mother, I realized that she went through the Khmer Rouge, and she had kind of reinvented the identity just to safeguard ourselves, and she kind of stayed with it somehow and didn't really tell me that it was like, oh, by the way, you are not really Cambodian, Khmer. So like these terms are problematic because in Cambodia, nobody will ever say I'm Khmer. Look at my skin tone, right? Obviously, I have mixture. And the Khmer is an ethnicity reference because they are the majority. People think all Cambodian are Khmer. And when we start to have this narrative, then diversity within it is eliminated. So I like to think that I am Cambodian, and I take pride of it. And there's a group of people who are in Cambodia that are different backgrounds. So this is a very elated person who discovered her ethnicity in her 20s.
I mean, you also had a very international or transnational life as well, from Cambodia to Canada to France and then back to Cambodia. I'm fascinated by the fact that you like many of us also went back to Cambodia to do some of your artistic and academic work that led you to a project that I'm familiar with when you were working on a movie called Don't Think I Have Don't Think I've Forgotten. Don't Think I've Forgotten.
Yes.
Tell us about that, because I watched it and it's an amazing documentary about Cambodian popular music during the wartime era.
Yes, so for me, the journey, it's interesting journey. Yes, I never saw myself as an artist. I think it just happened, and I think Anida said it. Among my people, once I moved to Cambodia, I just had that urge, and I don't know what it is. I'm home, and being home, there was a freedom for me to not worry the facade, to deal with others. I'm not others. I'm uncomfortable among my peers, my peeps, I would say. The project, I think I've forgotten. I started to be involved. The project already started by John Pirazi and other producers like Brad Bizier, and they were working on it. And they were looking for someone who speaks French, Cambodian, and English, who understand the culture, language, have connections, and who kind of knew a little bit of the music. I grew up with this music. My mother, that's what we played when we were in our basement in Canada, sewing, and that was the only music that we listened to. And that's how I joined and spent 10 years working on that project. So anything more specific you want to know about the story behind or music you want to know more, I could talk forever.
I mean, it's because it's number one, the music it's fantastic. It's just a lot of fun to listen to. And then of course the documentary, Don't Think I've Forgotten, is about, the subtitle is Cambodia's Lost Rock and Roll, and the lost part is the tragic and poignant part. What happened to the musicians, the producers, what happened to the recordings themselves during and after the period of the genocide. Obviously, a lot of people were lost. So the documentary is a recovery project in a lot of ways, bringing back this time of, wonderful music layered with nostalgia and tragedy. And I found it enormously moving myself to watch that documentary, and do recommend it to everybody. Do you think that, I mean, so often when we go back to like recovery of culture, you look at a country like Cambodia, people will talk about, oh, Siem Reap, Angkor Wat, this ancient civilization. This is like modern contemporary Cambodian civilization, and that tends to get overlooked in this narrative of tragedy.
But also, this is falling to like what the Khmer Rouge had idea what is to be a Cambodian, right? To be a Cambodian is to go back to doing farming, rice field, and then Angkor Wat time and all that stuff. And the idea that anything that is modern, therefore westernized, are contaminations, therefore has to be eliminated. And thing is anyone who are famous, recognizable face, it's harder for them to survive. So like our A-list singer, our A-list performer, their face is on vinyl, and you cannot say, oh, right, I am just a banana seller, because we know this is, since it's a Mutru it's kind of like hard. It's like, imagine this is something where I think a lot of Americans cannot imagine at this moment. There's no more rock and roll. You're not allowed to play it. You're not allowed to listen to it. You're not allowed to hum, and we're going to destroy everything. And then anything musicians, and I think when I bring it in that way, it's like, oh, a government can ban and all these things that happen, right? Luckily, music has made vinyl and tape and many, because we sell that, there's many copies of it that survive. Movies, only 3 reels were produced for each film, so at best 3 copies. So chance of survival is much lower. So a whole modern idea of what is being Cambodian not acknowledged and then being destroyed, and to this day struggle to have preservations, is quite it's really sad that whole generations are being deprived from all this cultural experience. That yes, many organizations and many people are working to bring back.
Well, I think that it's also really important to note that, like, that's why the rebuilding of the society has been so hard decades later. When you have erased, right, through war, like a whole generation of intellectuals, artists, skilled laborers, professionals, and then this massive exodus of refugees, who's left, and we know the answer, right? Because the Khmer Rouge remained, and people from the Khmer Rouge remained in power. And then you have a whole generation of young people, as people are giving birth right and left, but you don't have the mentorship, because these people have either died. If 90% of artists were killed at the time, who's going to pass that down, when the oral tradition was such a big part of how people pass so much of the music and the dance, and the songs around? So I wish people would pivot on that a bit more. It's not very easy to say, well, it's been already 50 years. How come they just can't get a hospital together, or whatever they say? That's quite ridiculous. And it's like, we had this like massive disruption to our very being. So how are you supposed to rebuild quickly? You can't. It's going to take another generation to do this.
I
Yeah,
want to say that it took 50 years to have people like me and Anida. It took our parents' sacrifices, our older siblings, in order for us to grow up, to get educated, and to finally say, now we have the know-how, right? But it wasn't like an overnight journey. And to me, like, as I go to all the different diaspora, so they say the generation 1.5, the second generation are stepping up. There are now many of us now, and that's exciting, but that was not possible 20 years ago, because we were still growing up and trying to figure this out.
right. I think something, Anita, that you said that kind of resonated with me is that like there are no mentors, there are no role models, since this entire um like faction of society was wiped out. I think we see that in a lot of like the 1.5 or second generation diaspora Cambodian folk or Cambodian Americans in places like Long Beach that resort to gangs or to different places where they are seeking the sense of belonging or even protection from all of the obstacles, challenges, adversities that America throws at them in their upbringing, right? I know that, I mean, and then from LinDa, something as ubiquitous or as ever present as rock and roll being the sort of transnational connector. And then I want to ask you about your both the Buddhist Bug and also the Red Chador, which you've performed in, I think, almost 20 countries and over seven or almost 20 over 20 cities in over 7 countries, right? Is it received by different diasporic or transnational Cambodian folk across the world, right? Across the globe? Like, are there parallels between like a Cambodian or Khmer American experience here in the United States to say somewhere in like a place like Paris or in Australia or or in Phnom Penh.
Yeah, so my works take a long time. The Buddhist Bug took 10 years to like fully complete and kind of move on to another piece. The Red Chador is currently an ongoing work that's already 10 years in the works. And what's very interesting to note is how when I first came out with the Buddhist Bug, there were mixed reactions to it. I think people didn't know what to make of it. So I got heat from both the Buddhist community, devout Buddhists, and I got heat from the Muslim community. But what's been nice about the Buddhist Bug is it's brought much more joy on a global level. Wherever I perform it, there's always a sense of joy with that work. It isn't questioned as much.
Okay, wait.
Um,
Actually, Anita, before you get to the joy, I want to ask, like, what kind of heat are we talking from
uh,
either of the communities?
So when I first showed it at Java Creative Cafe in Phnom Penh in near the Independent Monument, there's a cafe LinDa has shown there. It's a very famous place. It's well known for like really, not only starting the coffee scene there, but also bringing the arts through the cafe structure. And so I showed there, and one of her patrons had come in who was a devout Buddhist and saw my prints on the wall and refused to dine there further, wanted to talk to the manager and made it known that this is not Buddhism. What is this? Like this is an animal. What is this woman doing? This is, awful. And I refuse to come to your cafe until you remove this. And I was shocked. And then the cafe owner luckily stood by me and said, no, we're going to stand by the work. There's nothing wrong with this. So that was like heat number one from that side. And then because the work got some press and, that press then went online and spread out, and it was in Khmer. Some Muslims found it online and then put an X on my face as the Buddhist Bug and wrote in Khmer, "This is not Islam." And so I'm like,
Wow.
okay, great. And then this X with the Khmer writing that said, "This is not Islam," circulated for a while. And, at that point, it was just like, year one of the work. And so
Mm.
in this work that I do, you have to have a really thick skin. Very, 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 very thick skin as a performance artist and as someone who takes tremendous risk with one's body. And that comes into fruition with the Red Chador series. That work is the most polarizing work. I can never predict the reactions because people either love and accept her or freaking hate it. And this is from both sides, Muslim and non-Muslim. And I haven't quite figured out exactly why. I just keep doing it because luckily there are more people who embrace the work than, of course, hate it. But it is definitely a very difficult work to keep doing because I have been attacked, I've been threatened, I've been spit on, so much stuff from triggering ex-vets PTSD. This happened in San Francisco,
Mm.
to an attempted assault on my life where I finally just derobed and stepped out of character. That's the only moment that happened. To, going to a place where Bernie Sanders was speaking, the Red Chador would happen to be in town, shows up for this rally and gets shouted down by the Bernie bros. This is like in 2016. So it is
Offending people from
great
like all
reaction.
sides of the political spectrum who just have an issue. I mean, I want to go back to the
Well, and ultimately, right, the
yeah.
message that I got sent is, of course, the disappearance of the garment in Tel Aviv after I gave a talk at the first ever Palestinian Performing Arts Network. Now, that you can't get a better message than somebody taking your original garment and sending you the message to never come back to Ramallah or Palestine again.
Mm. That's pretty hot heat, if I may say so. I mean, I also want to like the joy. I mean, regardless, irrespective of the difficulty or adversity that you're facing in performing this piece? Like what keeps it going? What have some of those interactions been like for you?
Because I remade the work after its disappearance, it sort of, I didn't make the work for 2 years and then rebirthed the work just before the pandemic just before the pandemic. And I rebirthed the work in community. So the Red Chador is now amongst this group called the Rainbow Brigade. And so there are 6 others who sort of assist in creating this protection circle. And so anytime I perform that work, it's never alone anymore. It's always in community, and it's always tapping local participants who are not necessarily performers, because I am interested in a range of bodies to activate the work, that you don't have to be an artist to do this. In terms of the way that I have broadened the work. And so it keeps me going, because building with those folks in local communities in different regions has been really powerful, to hear people's stories and the ways in which the themes of the Red Chador intersect with their own life, whether or not they're Muslim or not. It doesn't matter to me. They have to have the courage to stand in solidarity to the themes of the work. And so that's really very inspiring for me to keep going, because now it's not about me. It really is about building this network of folks who are aligned with the themes of the work and can stand with me instead of having me do it alone. So I've kind of come to a solution with that. It's still not easy, because it's a whole production in order to do this work, and it's a lot of planning. It's a lot of risk assessment, and I've put into my process certain things, signals, and even like an earpiece, so that because the whole work is in silence, they can't really speak or use their voice. And so there are secret things underneath their veil that sort of protect each one of them.
So I have also been told periodically that my work can be controversial, and that Vietnamese people hate me, and so on, some Vietnamese people. But nothing compared to what you've been through. And of course, I do think that being a woman, being a Southeast Asian woman, being a Muslim woman who's foregrounding some of these themes of Islam in her work, is going to lead to a greater degree of provocation for many different reasons, all for the good, as long as you're not the person receiving these kinds of blowback. But LinDa, I'm curious, when we hear about Anida talking about her work, it's pushing against all of these various kinds of constraints. And of course, when we're dealing with a country that has a diaspora that is diverse, that has a very deeply conflicted history, that has problematic politics with the government and all of that, we'll probably see a lot of these kinds of controversies. And you've been back to Cambodia, and you have experience with the diaspora, and you yourself are an artist and a scholar. Is it difficult terrain to work in, given everything that we've heard?
I'm going to give an example how things that seems to be so easy is not. So in Faded Real, I made quite, I thought, mild criticism of the former king. In my opinion, was mild. And then the people who translated says we need to line up the Khmer version because I said, like, we are 2022. The kings passed away long ago, but there's still some either self-censorship that people do to themselves because they have such a long practice, or the fear of what might happen. And that's, I think, is even because communism stays so long, somehow it's the self-censorship that they absorb, internalize, that is actually forbid them from being actually doing what as an artist, as a scholar, what it's like, oh, well, I wouldn't do this because we already know what happens. Like, well, we don't know because we haven't done it. So it's really that part. And when I was working with Sopiapik in the 2005, we started to do a art festival. Many of the older generations, because we wanted to showcase them first, the one who in the 80s and 90s went to other Eastern Bloc communist country, been trained in the best schools and come back. And many of them just want to do landscapes, right? Because landscape is safe. And when we asked them to do, it was also this background of being censored to themselves. And when we say, well, you could do things that are not directly political, but have a social commentary. And that was a long path. The only artist that did not have any problem, it was actually Van Nat. Van Nat, who is one of the 7 survivors of the Tuosalang Museum, who basically survived through his art. He was like, yes, go ahead, let's do this. And then he was able to feel much, I guess for him, the struggle was under the Khmer Rouge and not after. So yes, it's an interesting navigations between artists and politics. So in Cambodia now, if this is part of the job description, I saw the job description, I was blown away. Anyone who wants to work at the ministry or even the minister has to know how to use Facebook. So anything you post on Facebook is monitored. So there's a control, obviously, that are reals too, that are not just imagined. So there's like the new generations are navigating that. How much can be played? How much? Yes, it's a really difficult terrain for artists to be able to say what can we say, cannot say.
That seems like a really low bar for a minister, like know how to use Facebook. But obviously in like different countries, Facebook is actually even more important, obviously, than in the United States in terms of politics. So you were a Fulbright scholar in Cambodia in 2024. I'm not sure if you're still doing that. So you're seeing everything right up until the very present. Cambodia is it's in a situation in which, as both of you have alluded to, the legacies of the Khmer Rouge are still very, very present in the government, with former cadres or their descendants in charge of the apparatus. I'm sure that there are intense political sensitivities to bringing up the past. Do you have hope for this is for both of you? Do you have hope for the possibilities of political and cultural openness in Cambodia, or does that have to come from the outside with the diaspora that is not possibly as constrained by political realities?
So I'm gonna sorry, Anida. I think your second part of questions, it's both, right? So many, because in the 50 years, many Cambodian local went to study abroad, right? So they came back. The Hun Manet, the prime minister now, actually was trained here in West Point in America. So the diaspora, it's not just the one who left after the Khmer Rouge, it's also the ones who in later on, in the 90s, 2000, went to study abroad and come back. So they are part of the government too. I just want to say that, when we had the tribunal for the Khmer Rouge, it was clearly said that it's going to be only the top 10, whatever, and they're going to not go for the ones. So that because many of them are still in government, right? So we're not going to go after them. That kind of was also limiting to justice that is potentially not being addressed. I don't know. I think the problem that we have, whether we're here in America, what's happening with Trump and all these things, when people say, I'm going to work in the inside, I'm going to change it. The reality is once we end there, how much are we being framed and structured that we learn so much to not to talk and speak out? And I talk it for myself. I don't have, one of the reasons I always admire Anida, and we worked past decades together, and I'm thankful for her to always include me, but I don't have her courage. And then one of the things, it's recently that I started to find more courage to speak out, because I always say, oh, I'll enter the game, I'm going to change. And then the structure, the system change you, your value change you, and just go like, oh, what happened? What happened to my idealism of my 20s? Well, because you learn how to not talk and not to speak out. And I think that's happened to what is happening in Cambodia. Is like there's this wave of modernizations and consumerism, and the people who suffer so much, they want their Louis Vuitton bag. These wealthy upper class are willing to sacrifice some suffering, because now they suffer enough. They want to have luxuries. And I don't know much about this. I wonder if they're kids, the next generation, say, what are we doing for? So I'm hopeful for the next generations that value might be
Yeah, we have
resettling.
to be. I mean, we have to be. I mean, one thing that I'm very clear on is when I was living there in Cambodia, I did not criticize, nor was I interested in criticizing the Cambodian government. And that is a very important thing to keep in mind with one's Americanness, because your mouth can get you into a lot of trouble over there. And it's not just about you at that point, because for me, I was working in community with so many other people, including the deported community. And my criticism was to the US government, because I was working on deportation and being very anti-deportation and working with deportees over there. But I also had a production crew, people who don't have a blue passport to be able to fly out of there or get some kind of American protection. I don't know. I'm not sure if we're in that state where we're going to get that American protection now. I don't think they care about us now. But at the time, I was very, very determined to make it clear that my issue was that I was always going to be political against the U.S. government and the policies there, so as to not endanger the people that were working with me as crew, assistants, and the deported community that's already there trying to make a life for themselves over there while hanging on to this hope of, laws reversing, policies changing. But what's been so interesting about the anti-deportation movement and the ways in which the Cambodian deportees have organized themselves and have put into play resources and ways to pull each other up, that's been really powerful to witness. Some of them even having government officials at the table to reject like certain policies that are dictated by the US government to take, deportees.
Mm.
I'm just going to be the professor for 2 minutes. So Cambodia had different returnees. So we have like in the 1990s, when other refugee camp closed down, those who were not able to go to another country, a third country, had to go back. Those returnees suffer a lot of stigma, rejections, because society, Cambodians say, you failed to live. So they were seen as failure. Then you have the returnees who are American deportee from America, from different, whether Clinton, Obama, Trump, they were returned for minor offense to felony, a list of range, and ICE would have a quota, how many they're going to be sending, deporting back. So these two groups are very different than returnees, where are artists or people who go back on their own volitions, right? So they have very wide range of experience going back to the country and how the country is receiving them.
I feel like that's a good lead into one of the questions that we've got from our audience member Riza Belen. If we around, if there's a way for y'all to, like, how is it that you reconcile your work as professors in higher education with your work as arts rabble rousers? I think, LinDa, you were kind of just talking about it, so I'll pass to you first before going to Anida. Is there a way that you reckon your work in higher education with your work as an arts rabble rouser, and what does that look different here in the United States compared to in Cambodia?
So when I was doing my work in 2005, my PhD director was saying, okay, I could see these are your chapter 5, chapter 6 of my thesis. So it was very much about social observations, what's happening in the urban landscape and everything. I always see that both scholarly or artists, it's similar. It's a very lonely reflections, like you are dealing with what you're observing, but it also in academia or in arts, it also needs creativity. If you just repeat the same thing over and over from what past masters have done, you're not really bring anything to the table. So I really find those both has a lot of similarities. I think academia has, for me, took me at the French academia, I should be precise. I was trained in French from my 20s to my 30s. I have internalized many of their mindsets and philosophical ideals that it took me until I came to America that I had to unravel, right? The notions of dual identities. I have a hard time saying for the first year, Cambodian Americans, what is that thing? Like Cambodian American, until I realized like, yes, you can be both. You don't have to be either or. And it took me this journey being in America to unravel how race has been internalized by the French for me. And then in academia, teaching that allowed me to, right? I started to read about Cambodian American experience and Asian American experience. I say, oh, this is much more an eye-opening. In my university, I've been blessed that there is, because it's a small liberal university that gave me a lot of leeway, right? For example, I was hired as an urban anthropologist, but me doing Cambodian cinema and film, they just go like, we are going to celebrate you. And it's not every university that will allow me to do this side other projects. They see that as a celebration. So as long as I'm doing what I was hired, but which I do, I've been, I think, lucky in that way.
Yeah, and Anida.
I'm pretty authentic with who I am wherever I am, and pretty unapologetic and very direct. I take that into the classroom where I essentially teach art and performance at a school that is not an art school and at a school that has no art department. So I'm teaching in interdisciplinary studies, and I teach my students empathy, I teach them creative risk taking, and I teach them collaboration. And I think those three things pretty much summarize my pedagogy as well as my artistic practice. And that's what I bring. I have a lot of my students activate spaces that, that don't usually get used because we don't have the resources of an art school. And so they have to make work in public spaces. They have to make work with materials that they have handy. They are not, rigorous artists. So a lot of it is it's just bringing this workshop style that I've done my entire artistic career into higher education. A lot of my peers, my academic peers, actually are, rabble rousers themselves. So I'm at a pretty decent place that I think respects experimental pedagogy, and a place that is standing with a lot of student activists. So I'm lucky that way because it's a much smaller school. But I definitely don't hide anything. In fact, I tell my students that they're not allowed to follow me in class on Instagram, but after they get their grade, then you can decide if you want to follow me.
We are at the end of the show, and I want to point out one part of Rizabellan's question that we didn't get to, which is the issue that in academia, at least in the United States, I don't know about France, but in the United States, there's a lot of silencing going on subsequent to October 7th and to Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza and the protests against it, which have been marked as being anti-Semitic. There's been a concerted effort in universities and now at the federal level to silence all kinds of dissent, all kinds of criticism, not just of Israel, but certainly of Israel at the forefront. And yet here we are, we're talking with rabble-rousing academic artists, hybrid types of people, both in terms of what they do and who they are. This platform of accented dialogues in diaspora is meant exactly to point out that there are so many different voices out there. There's no voices for the voiceless. The Cambodian people of all different backgrounds have never been voiceless. They've been silenced in different kinds of ways, and they've been claiming their voices in different kinds of ways, as we've seen with our guests here. And even as we mark this 50th anniversary of the end of the war in Southeast Asia, whether it's Cambodia or Vietnam or in the other places where the war was fought to a degree of unspeakable tragedy, we see that 50 years later, people have not been silenced. There are still survivors out there. And I put into the comments this article that I found inspiring recently, an article that I discovered from the writer John Berger, who's one of my influences. And this is from 2006. And he's talking about his visits to Palestine and describing what he sees as the undefeated despair of the Palestinian people. 2006, and 19 years later, Palestinian people still survive despite everything they've been through. It would be foolish to say that we only have hope. I don't really like these sentimental ideas of hope that are not alleviated with other kinds of acknowledgments of the difficulties that we're confronting. But the idea of undefeated despair seems to me to be completely appropriate for Palestinians, for Cambodians, for Vietnamese people, for all of us who are in the United States as we confront a regime of authoritarianism or authoritarian aspirations. It is intimidating, it is frightening in so many ways, but we look back how so many of our ancestors did survive and continue into the present in this stance of undefeated despair. I take hope in that and in the work and in the careers and in the ideas of our guests today. Thank you so much, LinDa, Saphan, Anida Yoeu Ali, for sharing your time with us today.